Okay, so continuing on from the Manage tab and everything that's on this ribbon. Um, so this is where you have materials. So this tool allows you to open the material window, and this is where you can actually start to create materials to assign to elements that you design. So when you render them, you can you can actually render what the material will look like. That's a video that we'll get in. I'll explain that in a later video to show you how to add materials. Object styles. When you open this window, you can see these are all the different types of categories that you can have. Like walls, windows, and stuff like this. And then the line weights that they have, and then so like a wall in projection, that's how the line weight, and in cut, that's the line weight. And then you can add colors, different line patterns. If you do click on a line weight, you see that they're numbered from 1 through 16. I will get to that in a minute. To show you, it's actually in this button over here that I'll show. Snaps, there are snaps, just like in AutoCAD. There are, there's snaps in Revit as well. I usually just leave the default one set. I never touch this. But just to let you know that snaps are there. Project information lets you put in information on your project. As you can see, I've already put in like the project address, the project name, and these are key because how I have this template set up, these automatically get populated in the title blocks that I've created, that are used, for the class. So that's kind of helpful. And then, the address I put in as well. Project parameters and shared parameters I wouldn't worry about. And transfer project standards I wouldn't worry about. Right now, these are kind of what helps create certain things. Like, see how I have this set up with the different disciplines and everything like that. I had to create parameters to do that. That's kind of really getting into Revit and using it to its full potential. So I'm not going to get into that with you guys now. Project units, obviously, it's just like, if you did units in AutoCAD, you can change the type of units that you want everything to be displayed in. And then, so common, it has like length, area, and volume, and all stuff like that. If you switch over to structural, this is all the units that are used on the structural side, and then so forth and so on. So if you went to HVAC, you could see all the different types of HVAC. So it's for the most part, you would probably, if you didn't like to work in feet and inches, you could change it to, meters or something like that if you wanted to. What purge unused, I would probably stay away from that as well, until you get familiar with Revit. What that does is it purges everything that you don't use. So you can see if I go back to the architecture tab for a minute and I click on window, when I load in a window, I loaded in this fixed window, it gives me all these different types of a fixed window, and I can always create more of those, which we'll show as we go further on. But there's like 8 types, and say I only use a 36 by 48 window in my project, and the rest of them are not being used. What purge unused will do is it'll take out all these different types, except for the ones that are being used. So it's kind of a way to help you kind of minimize your file size so it doesn't get too big. So that that's. But again, I would try to stay away from that. Usually, I will do that at like the end of a project. When my file gets really heavy. But I think for the most part, you probably try to stay away from it from now. This additional settings tab is where you can start to do line weights and line styles. So you can see, if I go back to the annotate tab for a second and I click on line, detail line, these are all the line types that I have. So if I go to manage and do line styles and expand this, these are all the line types, and then you can see they're the same from that drop down menu, and I can always hit a new one and add a new one, and now you have a line type there. And this is how, when I showed you in that object styles, if you wanted to do like hidden lines or phantom lines for different elements, you could create it here, and then kind of pick the type of pattern that you want, and then you assign it to the object style. So this is kind of like layers in AutoCAD. but not really, because in AutoCAD you would create a layer and then you would just draw with it. Where if I created a layer, then I'd have to go to like if I wanted my walls to be hidden line, I'd have to create a hidden line type, and then I could add it in, or I could just do a line type here and pick it. So it's a little different between the two, and I think this one if you did it with a wall, you wouldn't even have to assign a line to it. You can just do it hidden here, so that makes it a little bit easier. But if you're drawing, using the detail line tool, which is under the annotate tab, this is how you can start to set up different lines. The line weights, I showed you how there's 1 through 16 when you try to pick line weights. So this is 1 through 16, and then for each scale, this is the thickness the line will be when it's printed. So you could always, go in and edit it, yourself if you had specific line weights that were being asked for, or line weights that you made that So these are the scales, the customs and the typical scales, and then you could always add a new scale. If you hit add, it gives you all the different types of scales that there are in the project. So you could always add one. And then annotation, line weights, and perspective line weights you can always play with as well. This right here sets the location of the project. Within real, kind of like with real life. So if you click on that, you can actually put in the address, which I've already done, and will already be set up in the template. And this is key because when you go to run energy analysis, or you turn on the sun for shading, to add shade to your views, so you kind of get that depth perception when you show images. It's key to have the correct location set, because obviously the sun depends on where you are in the world. And when you run energy analysis and stuff like this, stuff like that. The coordinates and stuff I wouldn't worry about. If there's ever an issue with any of your projects that we have to play with the coordinates, I will show you guys that individually, but typically I never touch these unless there ever be an issue. Design options lets you create multiple options for something, and that's something that I will actually get into with tutorial C when I show you guys how to do kind of quick conceptual masses that were in the Mass and Insight tab. But basically, just to kind of give you a quick idea what this does, this lets you do multiple iterations of something and have only one show at a time. So you can still have multiple iterations on one file, but still have it just show. So like for instance, if I had just like a square building as an exterior wall, I can do a different design option for the interior. So I can do 3 different iterations of what the interior will look like, and just have one show at a time. So you have them all there, which is pretty new. That's something that's recently been added within the past year or two to Revit. So it's kind of a nice little function. The rest of the stuff I really don't use. Phasing, don't worry about phasing. That's when you get into the real life. Because when you draw a project, sometimes you may have existing conditions and then proposed conditions. So that's where phasing comes into play. But for now, don't worry about it. The add-ins tab, I've showed you where this is where if you guys download and install the STL exporter, this is where that will show up on the add-ins tab. The rest of the stuff I've never used here, so I don't have to worry about that. And then the last tab is the modify tab. And as I mentioned, whenever you click on a command, like I showed you, if you click on wall, there's like a special modify tab. You can see here it's modify place wall, and there's different options. But the modify tab itself is is always there for you to click on. And this gives you things like, so this is the properties here. So if I can actually, this is another way that you can turn properties on and off, is that. And then this is type properties, which is basically the same thing as just hitting edit type. It brings up type properties. So again, this is something that if this window is open, you have type properties already. And then this is where you can copy and paste stuff with the clipboard, pretty self-explanatory. This is kind of how you can start to manipulate geometry. This is the paint tool, so you can paint materials to something, spit spaces and all stuff like that, but that's something that I'll get into later. So this is all the modify tab that you have here. I should say modify palette, where you can move, copy, rotate, trim, extend. It kind of works like trim from AutoCAD, but it's more of like a trim fillet hybrid. So you can see here, I'll show you with two lines quickly. If I hit trim, I pick the two, and it actually does a fillet for me, so it really trims it, and does a fillet as well, of 0 if you want, a fillet. But also, like if I had it like that, and I did the same thing, it does the same option, where in that case it trimmed, but in the other case it actually did a fillet with a 0 radius. So it's kind of like a combination of the two. Then you have extend, which you can obviously extend something to something else. Mirror, offset, align, so you can align two things. This is scale, array, split. Pin and unpin is actually pretty helpful, and I'll get into that in site. And when I do a tutorial B for the site. But to just show you quickly, like see this line, I can click on it and move it wherever I want by just either clicking on it and hitting move, or just clicking with the mouse and dragging. But if it's pinned, it's stuck in place, so Revit won't let me move it. So that's good for something that it may have to be where it is, and you pin it so it can never be moved, and that's usually what I do for site. Once I create a site, I pin it so it cannot be moved, because sometimes you may be clicking and you'll drag it and go somewhere. This is delete. Obviously, you can just use delete on your keyboard. If you wanted to, you select something and hit delete on the keyboard, it deletes it. But you can hit delete from here, and I'll do it that way. And then this is if you wanted to do a quick measure, you could use this stuff to measure a distance quickly. I usually just use to annotate and just do a quick dimension, but you can measure from there. This is to create groups of things. I wouldn't really worry about that for now, but basically what that is, if I have say you did a quick drawing of, say like a layout maybe of a floor plan that you wanted to sketch. Now obviously all these lines are separate kind of entities, and they could get lost in the shuffle. So what you could do is you could highlight them and group them into one thing, and now they're a group themselves, and then you could always edit the group so you can adjust the lines. But so now they're kind of there together. So that's what group does. Not something that you probably use, but you always could. It could be interesting to use for your kiosk because they're going to be separate parts. So maybe that's something you do if you're going to be building your kiosk on Revit. You can maybe group some things if you wanted to. And then the last thing that I want to show on here is there's actually like a bar right here that you can see. It's a gray bar, it's a blank gray bar, but you might have noticed as I was clicking on some commands, this bar actually becomes active, and there's some things that they give you. And so you can see I clicked on wall, and you can pick the height of the wall and what the height's going to be. But those options are also here as well, and that's something that we'll get into later. So you always want to be cautious of whenever you do active a command or a tool, I should say. Always be aware of this bar, because something may show up there, and you may need. And sometimes it may be important, and sometimes it may not. So that's something that you just always want to be on the lookout for. And I think that's again. I'm running out of time on this video, so I'm going to stop here. And the next video, hopefully I can get everything finished in one more. I'll just explain, these two windows and then what's down here on the bottom. And that should be it.